What is up, YouTube? I'm Conor Palendat, Realtor with Palendat Associates. All of my contact info is in the description below, so if you need more info about buying, selling, relocating, or investing in the Saskatoon area, I am more than happy to answer any of your questions. Today, we're diving into the intricate world of real estate contracts. Whether you're a seasoned investor or a first-time homebuyer, understanding the basic ins and outs of these legal agreements is crucial for navigating the complexities of the property market. In this video, we'll break down the essential components of real estate contracts, hopefully clear up any uncertainty, and equip you with the knowledge you need to make informed decisions in your real estate transactions. So grab your pen and paper because class is officially in session. Let's start off by clarifying that every province is going to have their own specific versions of forms that they use, and the wording or order can't be expected to be the same as what we use in Saskatchewan. However, many of the basic elements will be the same. This video is also not to be taken as legal advice, but simply to provide more awareness for both buyers and sellers. Any specific questions of a legal nature should be discussed with a lawyer. So with that being said, let's jump into it. Real estate contracts are bilateral contracts because of the mutual exchange of promises. In every contract, you have 6 essential elements. They are an offer, acceptance, consideration, legal intention, capacity, and legal object. We're really only going to touch on the first 3 as they are kind of the most applicable to actually submitting an offer, whereas the latter 3 would be determining if the offer is proper, meaning did they intend to enter into a contract? Are they of sound mind? Is it a contract stipulating something illegal to happen, making it an illegal contract, etc.? So at its base, when it comes to real estate, an offer is a promise to purchase a property, usually with an expectation of acceptance or counteroffer. Any offer can be revoked, just make sure you're doing so properly based on the specific contract, so as to avoid any legal trouble. Now, the acceptance, like the offer, must be given in clear terms and must be a positive act. For example, you can't say, if we don't hear from you by this day and time, we assume you've accepted. That's just not how it works. In an organized real estate, the mandatory forms we use as realtors, both the offer and acceptance are very clearly laid out so there is no confusion. Now, if it's a totally private sale and one party doesn't know what they are doing, you may run into instances where things are somewhat unclear. The third element we'll go over is consideration. The consideration is the element of the contract where the party trying to enforce said contract must have paid something in return for the promise. Now, the common thing you hear is that the consideration in question with your real estate contract is your deposit, but this isn't exactly the case legally. The consideration must be of some value in the eyes of the court, but not necessarily money. For example, in a real estate contract, the seller promises to deliver title to the property and the purchaser promises to pay for it. The payment does not need to exchange hands to make a binding contract. So if you think you can just weasel out of a home purchase by simply not getting your deposit in, you better saddle up for a lawsuit because it's going to get interesting. Okay, so with some of the basic legal jargon out of the way, I'm going to now pull up the contract used in Saskatchewan and go through some of the more important elements. Okay, so here we have the contract, residential contract of purchase and sale open for Saskatchewan. So again, we're not going to go super heavily detailed into this because every offer and transaction is different. But we're going to go through kind of the most common things you'll see, or basic questions that I get lots of. So all this first is just contact info for your buyer or your seller and both brokerages. One thing we'll clear up here at the bottom. So the following describe property, legal description or description of mobile home on leased land. So depending where you are, for instance, Saskatoon, it's very common to use parcel numbers for the legal description. You might also see lot block and plan numbers, especially in other centers. And then obviously rural, you're going to get your legal land description. If it's say an acreage or a farm, your section, township, range, meridian. And so that's what you'll see here. So don't get too confused if, one time you buy a house, it's a parcel number, and the next time it's a lot block and plan. It's not a big deal. basically, your agent, you're loyal. We're just making sure that that number is correct. And then obviously having the civic address, this would be, if you live on 123 Main Street, Saskatoon, and then city or RM. Okay, section 1. So this is all just about the purchase price, how it's to be paid, etc. So, you'd enter in your purchase price here. And then 1.2b gives you, your option to do deposit by check, cash, e-transfer, and if it's to be received by the buyer's brokerage and deposited within 2 business days of acceptance, or, if you don't want that, you can set it to be received on or before a certain date, and then it stipulates it's to be deposited within 2 business days of receipt. So it used to be they just had the one section, and so, we had to put, if you didn't want it right to be have to go in right the day of acceptance, then we'd have to put it down as a term. Now they give you the option to do it the other way. 1.2c, what portion of the purchase price is by new mortgage? And then you've got the balance of cash as well down here, 1.2h. So every real estate transaction, minimum down payment you have to have is 5%. So that 5% would be basically split between how much are you going to put as a deposit and then how much of that remaining is going to have to be cash. So that's really how that's broken down. Now, and then obviously the remaining amount would be by new mortgage. Now you do have different things here. So if you're assuming an existing mortgage, what amount you could put there. Other financing of some kind you could put there as well, that dollar amount. By other terms. So, I was talking about deposit. We like to do our deposit like this. Make it a term deposit to be in trust upon removal of conditions. Gives you a little bit of leeway, and the date can obviously be floating. So if you do have to move the removal date for existent, for example, you're not having to do a whole ton of amendments all the time. And then by other conditions. So really, again, depending on the total situation, the one thing you just have to make sure of is that all of the numbers here add up to the proper purchase price. Section 2, resale condominiums. We're not really going to touch on that, but those would be set out in the attached Schedule C. Pretty typical. You got your financing condition, and then you can put any other conditions in here that you want. So that would be, home inspection, gas line locate, permit history from municipality, whatever else you want to put in there. That's where you would put that. And then obviously those conditions have to be removed, on or before a specific date, to basically make the sale firm and binding. Section 3, again, resale condominiums. All that information is on attached Schedule C. We won't go over that. Attached terms are or are not set out in following schedules. So where you might see, schedules like A, B, and U is if, say you're building a newly built home, the builder is going to have their own kind of sets of contracts. And obviously, as agents, we have to use these specific contracts. So generally those builder specific agreements will get lumped in as schedules of a different name and make up part of this contract. That's kind of how that works. Or, the way we like to do it, because there isn't a ton of room here, generally we'll actually put our, me and my team will put our conditions and terms onto a Schedule A instead of putting it here. Just makes it a little bit cleaner, more room, more detailed explanations. Section 4 is just all talking about the actual closing process. So 4.1, a big word salad, basically just saying, the buyer agrees to pay the seller, and if you don't, you're agreeing to pay them interest at the Bank of Canada overnight rate target, plus 4% per annum on any portion of the purchase price not received by the seller, at the proper time. Also saying that the seller, shall have a lien and charge against the property for the unpaid portion. A seller agrees to pay all costs of discharging any existing mortgage or other encumbrances against the property not assumed by the buyer. And 4.3 is actually where you would put the date and time where the contract would be complete and you would take possession. 4.4, just talking about adjustments. So, adjustments for taxes, insurance, utilities, condo fees, things like that. Basically, this just means that, that's all going to get adjusted and paid out on the completion day. So let's say the seller paid their property taxes yearly instead of on a monthly thing. Well, come possession day, the buyer will need to pay for their portion onwards, and that will go to the seller. This is saying if the property is rented and the buyer is not assuming tenancy, seller is responsible for all costs related to ending the tenancy. 4.6, again, just seller to transfer title to the property, free and clear of all encumbrances, except obviously the ones that they legally have to have, such as any easements, utility right-of-ways, things like that, or other things that a buyer agrees to in contract. Again, this is very specific to where their house is and the transaction itself. The remaining areas in this schedule are just saying that both the buyer and seller agree that time will be of an essence and agree to prepare and execute promptly any documents related to complete the transaction. As well as who's to pay for what. For instance, seller transfer authorization, and then for the buyer paying for your transfer of title and things like that. So that's all kind of laid out here. Again, a little bit of part about acceptance or revocation of the offer. Again, very specific to the contract itself. Insurance, basically just stating that seller's on the hook for insuring the property until the completion day, and then the buyer is on the hook for insuring the property from the completion date onwards. So, and then if any loss or damage to the property occurs before the seller has paid the purchase price, then any insurance proceeds shall be held in trust for the buyer and the seller according to their interest in the property. So, obviously, seller, you want to keep your home insurance until you no longer own it, and buyer, you want to make sure you have home insurance for the day you actually own it. And then if for whatever reason something happens, obviously insurance is covered, it'll get settled. Warranties and representations, section 6, basically just saying, seller represents to the best of her knowledge that the land complies with existing municipal land use, building improvements, are not placed on any easement or right of way, and that, the dwelling or buildings comply with all relevant bylaws, regulations. 6.2, this area, is just, again, seller represents the warrant and warrants to the buyer that the seller has legal right to sell the property. The seller is not a non-resident of Canada for purposes of income tax. And then this is where any attached and unattached goods included you would enter in. So this would be your fridge, stove, dishwasher, dryer, things like that, of that nature. And then it's also continued here. So, your water heater, sump pump, alarm system, if there is, you click included. If there isn't, you click not included. So again, it depends on this thing, on each thing. Again, more warranties. Again, we're not going to go super in depth over there, as again, it kind of depends quite a bit based on each transaction. Section 7, remedies and disputes. So this is going to outline specific things for issues. So for instance, if offer is not accepted, then any deposit or money goes back to the buyer. But if the offer, section 7.2 says if the offer is accepted, but conditions have not been satisfied or waived, then again, entire deposit or any money paid by the buyer goes back to the buyer. Now 7.3, if the offer is accepted and all conditions have been removed in writing, by the date set forth, blah, 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 above, and the buyer fails to execute any required conveyance or formal documents when prepared, or fails to pay any required cash payment or comply with any of the terms in this contract, the contract shall be void at the seller's option, where the defaulting party is the buyer. The deposit and any other money shall be forthwith delivered to the seller's brokerage as forfeiture to the seller. So basically, again, that's a big word salad just to say that if you do not follow any of the terms of the contract, like say you say your deposit's supposed to be in on April 1st and you get it in on April 10th, well, again, that could basically void the contract and you would lose your deposit. Same thing with, say, you remove conditions and then you just want to back out later. Again, you lose your deposit. And then same thing, if for whatever reason you want to go through with the sale, but let's say, something happens, you can't come up with the money, again, void, lose your deposit. Basically, this section just saying that buyer and seller agree to the provisions of the real estate regulations when it comes to trust funds and the money held there. This just saying that if substantial damage or change to the property occurs to the completion date, the contract shall be terminated and the deposit will be forthwith returned to the buyer unless the damage is repaired and the change remedied or otherwise agreed to the buyer and seller in writing. So let's say, some bad fire damage or something happens to the property, the buyer does not have to continue with the purchase of the home, even if it is going to maybe be repaired. It gets a little bit muddy there. So again, every situation is going to be very different, but just obviously substantial damage or change, the buyer could potentially terminate the contract and get their money back. And then 7.6 is actually building upon 7.3 a little bit, that the disbursement of the deposit and other monies as agreed to above is not a prohibition from the buyer or the seller seeking a civil remedy for a breach of this contract. So let's just say you you remove all your conditions and you don't want to continue. Okay, you lose your deposit, but that actually does not prevent the seller from now taking legal action with a civil suit, looking for more damages. So be aware of that. Obviously, anything with contracts is super important to follow it to the letter and follow through on it. So before putting in an offer, you want to be extremely sure, that this is the one, and especially before removing conditions, you want to make sure you are absolutely ready and can complete the deal. Section 8 and 9 is just going over, this is the buyer section, so unless revoked sooner, the offer is open to day and time, and then obviously upon acceptance, creates a binding contract of purchase and sale, signed and sealed at the buyer, again, day and time, buyer signature, witness. So traditionally, if you're signing it on paper, you will need a witness to sign. Now with digital signing, which I would say is the vast majority of deals, you don't need a witness, as the actual program itself is considered a witness. It will log, your IP address from where it was signed, the day, the time, all the information associated with whoever's signing. And so that's considered, good enough for that witness aspect. Same with basically the seller side. If they agree to it, sign and seal at the buyer, by the seller, and then the seller's signature as well. Obviously, if there's a counter offer, it's a little bit different. The seller would not sign this section, but they would sign the counter offer, and then again, it would be up to the buyer to then sign the counter offer to get a deal in place. And that wraps things up. While we didn't heavily get into all the different scenarios you could find yourself in, hopefully you are feeling a little more confident in your understanding of the subject and feel comfortable being able to have a more informed discussion with your agent. If you have any questions at all about content in today's video, or just want to know more about Saskatoon area, all of my contact info is in the description below, so please feel free to email me or give me a call or text. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the rest of my videos for other real estate content. Thanks, and have a great day.